Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. The first and most important thing I want to say is God bless the Catholic Information Center for the wonderful work that you do for young professionals in this community and for the church and for the country. God bless the CIC. Thank you, Father Charles. Thank you, staff. I am so delighted that my parents are here, that my father at age 94 was able to make it. What Jerry quoted me as saying is absolutely right. He's my guide and my hero and my role model. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom, for being here. Jerry Bradley. My goodness, Jerry. I'll get you back sometime. But thank you, and thank you, Pam, for making the trip from South Bend. It's just so wonderful of you to do. And gosh, aren't you glad you got to know Rabbi Meir Soloveichik? Isn't he the greatest? I'm so proud of him. So proud of him. Gosh, what an honor that Justice Alito and his wife Martha have come along, and Attorney General Barr, Mr. Mulvaney, my dear old friend, Judge Griffith, Eugene Scalia, and the others. I'm so honored that you're here. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Appreciate it. My beloved friend, Hadley Arkus, is here, the great Hadley Arkus, and I'm so pleased to have him. And in addition to Rabbi Solly, so many of my other former students and some current students are here, and I'm just so delighted that they're here with me this evening, together with some of the former fellows and current visiting fellows of the Madison program at Princeton, and a big, wonderful delegation from Princeton right over there, Evie Bailing from my staff, Bronwyn McShay. Thank you all for coming. Ellie, Allie, all of you, thank you for coming. Pat. Now, the last thing that you want to hear after dinner is a dry academic lecture, but I'm not going to let that stop me. So, relax. It was the distinctive claim of late 20th century secular liberal political philosophy that sound principles of justice require that law and government be neutral as between controversial conceptions of the human good. Critics of that view, including me, argued that that neutrality to which orthodox secularist liberalism of the period aspired, or at least purported to aspire, was neither desirable nor, strictly speaking, possible. That political philosophy was, I argued, Hadley argued, others argued, built on premises into which had been smuggled controversial, substantive ideas, liberal, secularist ideas, about human nature, the human good, human dignity, and indeed human destiny. Ideas as substantive and controversial as those proposed by Catholicism, Judaism, and other so-called comprehensive doctrines, be they secular or religious. Today, my friends, little effort is made by secular liberals, or progressives as many prefer to be labeled, to maintain the pretense of neutrality, having gained the advantage, and in many cases having prevailed, at least for now, on battlefront after battlefront in the modern culture war, and having achieved hegemony in elite sectors of the culture, for example, in education at every level, in the news and entertainment media, in the professions, in corporate America, and even in much of religion, including making inroads into the Catholic Church. There is no longer any need to pretend. Take as an example the issue of marriage. Today, virtually no one on either side of the debate doubts that marriage, as redefined by the Supreme Court over Justice Alito's wonderful objection, embodies substantive ideas about morality and the human good, ideas that differ profoundly from those embodied previously in matrimonial law, ideas that, according to partisans of the redefinition of marriage, are to be preferred to competing ideas, Catholic ideas, natural law ideas, biblical ideas, precisely because they are allegedly superior to those old-fashioned, outmoded religious or natural law ideas, the ideas they supplanted. So now that the pretense of neutrality has been more or less dropped and is on its way to being forgotten, what is the substance of the perspective or ideology, or perhaps religion, that is now fully exposed to view, and not merely the view of its critics, people like me? And what shall we call it? In an important new book that I would recommend to all of you called Pagans and Christians in the City, legal philosopher Stephen Smith gives that view, that ideology, that religion, a name: paganism. Now, this label is, of course, provocative. Professor Smith's reasons for choosing it, however, go well beyond a mere desire to provoke. What he perceives, rightly in my view, is that contemporary social liberalism or progressivism reflects certain core and constitutive ideas and beliefs that partially define the traditions of paganism that were dominant in the ancient Mediterranean world and in certain other places, up to the point at which they were defeated, though not quite destroyed, by the Jewish sect that came to be known as Christianity. Of course, some progressives will suppose that Smith is, and I now am, deploying the term pagan as an epithet. But we mean something quite specific by the word. We use it to characterize ideas and beliefs that a great many people today, especially those in the ideological vanguard, have in common with people of, for example, pre-Christian Rome. This does not mean that contemporary secular progressivism shares all the ideas and beliefs of ancient Romans, such as belief in gods like Jupiter or Neptune or Venus, but rather that some of the central ideas and beliefs that distinguish secular progressives from Orthodox Christians and Jews, and one could add Muslims, today are ideas and beliefs that they have in common with people whose ideas and beliefs Judaism and Christianity challenged in the ancient world. Secular progressives, no less than people of other faiths, hold cherished, even identity-forming beliefs about what is meaningful, valuable, important, good and bad, right and wrong. They may not believe in God or a transcendent and personal deity, but certain things are nevertheless sacred to them, things that they live for and would be willing to fight and even die for. For example, what they regard as racial justice, or LGBT rights, or environmental responsibilities. They have faith, as General Barr pointed out in his speech at Notre Dame, and indeed a faith. Just look at the child preacher Greta Thunberg. But what is it about the secular progressive faith that warrants our labeling it as pagan? After all, though not theistic, it is certainly not in any literal sense polytheistic. Well, Professor Smith explains, and I quote him, "Pagan religion locates the sacred within this world. In that way, paganism can consecrate the world from within. It is religiously relative to an immanent sacred. Judaism and Christianity, by contrast, reflect transcendent religiosity. They place the sacred ultimately outside the world," unquote. Now, Smith concedes that this characterization oversimplifies things a bit. But the oversimplification is mainly in the description and characterization of Judaism and Christianity, not secular progressivism. The biblical faiths conceive God as transcendent, to be sure, but not in a way that excludes elements of divine immanence. In Jewish and Christian doctrine, a transcendent God, sanctifies the world, this world, the world of human affairs, by entering into it while still transcending it. And God's transcendence means that for the believer, this world is not one's ultimate home. We are, in a sense, resident aliens of this world. Smith contrasts Jews and Christians with pagans on precisely this point. I quote, "The pagan orientation accepts the world as our home and does so joyously, exuberantly, and worshipfully," unquote. Now, my friends, Christianity, had it been a religion of pure and exclusive transcendence, might have simply rejected this world and not concerned itself with this world's affairs. The authorities of pagan Rome might then have left Christianity alone, treating it as just one more odd and exotic religion in an empire of odd and exotic religions. There were many such in the Roman Empire. But Christianity is not that kind of faith. So it took an interest in the world's affairs and developed ideas about such things as authority, obligation, law, justice, and the common good. Ideas that challenged pagan ideas and pagan practices in a variety of areas, some of them profoundly important. A central one was sex. As Smith notes, within the pagan matrix of assumptions, the Christian view of sexuality was not only radically alien, it was close to incomprehensible. Now, this is certainly true historically. That's true. I mean, the Roman power elite just couldn't understand some basic Christian ideas about sexuality, like the idea that men shouldn't commit adultery. They got the idea that women shouldn't commit adultery. They didn't get the idea that men shouldn't commit adultery. But consider that the Christian view of sexuality is today, is it not, within the matrix of assumptions of contemporary secular progressivism, perfectly aptly described as not only alien, but close to incomprehensible. It is. Consider again the debate over marriage. The biblical and natural law conception of marriage as conjugal, that is, as the one flesh union of sexually complementary spouses, is not only alien to secular progressives who understand marriage merely as a form of sexual romantic companionship or domestic partnership, but it's nearly incomprehensible to them, except as what they suppose is bigotry against people who are attracted to and wish to marry, as progressives understand that term, people of their same sex. Or consider the view that non-marital sexual conduct and relationships, including homosexual ones, are inherently immoral. That too is regarded by a great many secular progressives as not only unsound, not only wrong, but unreasonable, outrageous, scandalous, even hateful. How could anybody believe that? Yeah, Christians believed it for 2,000 years, but how could anybody believe it? How could anybody believe it today? They can account for the belief, if at all, again, only as religious irrationalism, or those crazy Christians or crazy Orthodox Jews. As many today claim, the alternative is to count it, and increasingly this is true in secular progressive circles, to count traditional moral beliefs as psychopathologies. As the historian Kyle Harper notes in a recent book on the transformation of beliefs about sexuality and morality in the ancient world, sexuality, and I quote Harper here, came to mark the great divide between Christians and the world, unquote. Christian ideas rooted in Jewish thought about sexual norms, the rejection of fornication, of adultery even by men, homosexual conduct, pornographic displays, and so forth, were revolutionary. It's hard for us to understand, 2,000 years into Christianity, just how revolutionary Christian morality was in the ancient world, in the ancient Mediterranean world, in Rome. So paganism, in the pagan establishment, I should point out that the pagan establishment was no more welcoming of revolutionaries, even nonviolent ones like the Christians. The Christians weren't taking up arms, but they were still revolutionaries against these Roman moral ideas. And the Roman establishment was no more welcoming of these Christian revolutionaries than any establishment ever is of any revolutionaries. So paganism could not and did not tolerate Christians, even when Christianity was far too weak to pose any real challenge to the most powerful political and military force on the face of the earth. It was not that Roman authorities refused to allow minority religions of any kind, I repeat. Those minority religions that could coexist with the dominant paganism were allowed to. They continued to exist. They were unmolested by the Romans. But the Romans always found the Jews to be troublesome, and they perceived Christianity, a convert-seeking religion, when it came onto the scene, as a grave threat. It would turn things upside down. No guns, of course no one had guns in those, no arms, no military, no army, right? But the Romans had the sense to fear it, to fear Christian ideas, because they were so revolutionary. And Christian ideas about sex, and in consequence about Roman sexual practices, figured significantly in the Roman perception that we had better do something about these Christians. They are dangerous. No arms, no military, no spears. Still dangerous. The Roman establishment feared that Christianity would, in Stephen Smith's wonderfully evocative phrase, turn the lights out on the party. And that, of course, is precisely what Christianity did. But in our own time, the lights have been turned back on, and the party is going again. In the 1940s, Alfred Kinsey convinced a lot of people that sexual satisfaction is a human need, that psychological health and wholeness generally require frequent, regular sexual activity, which may be inside or outside of marriage, it doesn't matter, and that Judeo-Christian norms of sexual morality, when embraced, result in stilted, even twisted personalities. That's the secular progressive rap on Judeo-Christian sexual ethics. In the 1950s, Hugh Hefner persuaded people that pornography was or could be innocent fun, and that the Playboy philosophy of sexual indulgence was the way for up-to-date, sophisticated people to lead their lives. I don't need to tell you about the 60s. You will know all about that. The gay rights or LGBT movement has made the affirmation of homosexual conduct and relationships the civil rights cause of our day. Dissent is not permitted. Claims to religious freedom are dismissed as mere excuses for discrimination. Bake the cake, you bigot. Which is why great heroes like Monsi Alvarado and Bill Mumm and the Beckett Fund have to spend so much time fighting for elementary religious liberty today. Christians, observant Jews, and other traditional religious believers have been knocked back on their heels. Reversing the sexual revolution, despite the growing evidence of its baleful social consequences, especially for children. This has not been pretty, especially for children. Still, reversing it seems nearly inconceivable. Few believe that its forward march can be paused or even meaningfully slowed down. The vast majority of Christians think that the most they can hope to accomplish for this new epoch of pagan ascendancy are some minimal protections for their own liberty to lead their lives as they see fit, in conformity with their faith, and not be forced to facilitate or participate in activities that they cannot in good conscience condone. Progressives say, after all, that they are for individual autonomy and liberty. When they were pushing for the redefinition of marriage, they insisted that all they were seeking was live and let live. Of course, that claim has already proven to be, if I may borrow a phrase from Hillary Clinton, no longer operative. Many Christians and other believers despair even of the possibility of protecting their children from being indoctrinated into the beliefs of the governing elite, the new ruling class, or what perhaps might be described as the old but repaganized ruling class. They believe we have entered a new Diocletian age. They not unreasonably suppose that it is precisely this reality that is being signaled when progressive intellectuals, such as Professor Mark Tushnet of Harvard Law School, say things like this, and I quote Professor Tushnet: "The culture war is over. They lost, we won. Taking a hard line, you lost, live with it, is better than trying to accommodate the losers who, remember, defended and are defending positions that liberals regard as having no normative pull at all. Trying to be nice to the losers didn't work well after the Civil War, nor after Brown against Board of Education. And taking a hard line seemed to work reasonably well in Germany and Japan in 1945. I should note," Professor Tushnet goes on, I'm still quoting, "I should note that LGBT activists in particular seem to have settled on the hard line approach, while some liberal academics defend more accommodating approaches. When specific battles in the culture war were being fought, it might have made sense to try to be accommodating after a local victory, because other related fights were going on, and a hard line might have stiffened the opposition in those fights. But the war is over, and we won." Unquote. So there you are. The neo-pagans are in no mood to be accommodating. Christians and others who dissent from progressive orthodoxy can expect what Professor Tushnet, with admirable candor, describes as the hard line approach. We are to be treated like the defeated Germans and Japanese after World War II. For faithful Catholics and our allies in dissent from neo-pagan orthodoxy, the question then is, so what do we do? How should we respond to the hard line approach? Because that's what's being taken. An approach that will be, and in fact is being, implemented by people who want to ensure that we never again get near the light switch, and that we are properly punished for having switched off the lights to the party in the first place. Some Catholics and other religious folk, including some entire denominations, have already taken the path of capitulation and acquiescence. They have joined the other team. They keep the liturgies and they keep the clothing and so forth, but substantively they've joined the other team. They maintain the visible forms of faith while yielding its moral substance. They have made themselves, if I may now be candid, the useful idiots of neo-paganism. I'm here borrowing, of course, Stalin's famous characterization of the anti-communist liberals of his time. Now, it seems to me obvious that this is not an option for us. It is not an option for serious believers. So what do we do? Often the question is posed as flight or fight. I've never been completely clear about what Rod Dreher, whom I admire, has in mind by the Benedict Option, what he calls the Benedict Option. He's described it as a strategic retreat, but also says that it doesn't mean that we should not stay involved in the world. Well, I certainly agree that we need to stay involved in the world. We have an obligation as believers to bear faithful witness to the values and principles that we know are integral to justice and human flourishing. But I don't see what we should be retreating from, what this strategic retreat is all about. And to what or where could we retreat? To our families, religious communities, civil society associations? Well, that won't work. They'll hunt us down and dismantle our institutions. Remember, we're to be treated like the defeated Japanese and Germans. Beto O'Rourke, in his characteristically, charmingly hapless way. I enjoyed writing that line. let the cat out of the bag on that point in a recent Democratic presidential debate, and none of his rivals contradicted him in any serious way. That tells you where we are. Remember what Beto O'Rourke said? What we'll do is yank the tax-exempt status from any church that doesn't go along with our view on same-sex marriage. So, they are determined that our children, or at least our grandchildren, will think the way they think, not the way we think. So permitting us to retreat to the functional equivalent of the monasteries, where we can quietly tend the gardens of our own families and transmit to our children our own values, is not an option for them. Again, remember, we are to be treated like the defeated Japanese and Germans after World War II. So flight, running away, is not an option. We have no choice but to fight. And it is and will continue to be hard. There will be casualties, lots of them. As I observed when I spoke in this city at the annual Catholic prayer breakfast a few years ago, the cost of discipleship is a heavy cost, and it has only gotten heavier in the years since then. The days of comfortable Catholicism are over. My friends, we are back in the position of our forebears in Imperial Rome. If we are true to our faith, if we are true to ourselves, then we are quite literally intolerable as far as the Mark Tushnets and Beto O'Rourkes are concerned. And they are legion. And they hold massive cultural, political, and economic power. So the question and the challenge we face is simply this: can we muster the courage to be faithful, as John Paul II mustered the courage in Poland to be faithful, standing against the enormous, to all appearances, unbreakable power of Soviet tyranny? He had the courage to be faithful. Can we be so courageous? The cause must have looked hopeless to most Poles, to most Eastern Europeans, to most Russians, most victims of persecution and oppression. And yet, he stood faithfully. The man we really honor tonight is not me, it's John Paul II. Why do we honor him? Because he stood faithful. He had courage. Can we muster the courage to be faithful, to boldly bear witness to truths that are unpopular among those controlling the levers of cultural, political, and economic power? Are we willing, if necessary, to pay the costs, the heavy costs of discipleship? Now, of course, without God's help, nothing of this kind would be possible. Yet we have it on the authority of Christ himself that God's grace is superabundant. No one who asks for the courage to bear faithful witness will be denied it. No one who is prepared to take up his cross and follow Jesus will find the burden too great to bear. So shall we flee from the battle? No. Quite the contrary. Onward, Christian soldiers. Thank you.